Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to be here and that you have taken the time to pop in. Let me share the screen real quick so you can see our presentation and get it started, and then we will get going. So as you know, we're here today to talk about trends in technology from bauma 2025, which just happened 2 weeks ago. So everything is fresh in our experts' minds. So we're thrilled to have um, Wilfried Aulbur, um, who is a partner with Roland Berger, Simon Nicholson, who is Business Development Director with Turntide, and Becky Schultz, who is the VP of Content for the Power Division of KHL Group and is the Editor-in-Chief of Power Progress, participating this much. Thanks, guys, so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Before we get started, if you've been with us before, you know that we have some housekeeping tips to share. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand on the Current and Wave website within 48 hours of the live event. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation today, throughout our conversation. So please use the Q&A section, not the chat section. Please use the Q&A section to ask your questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll answer as many as possible at the end of our conversation. We also have the link for our May and June webinars in the chat, so you can go ahead and register for those before you log out of this session. And remember that this is a live event. Some of us have puppies, and they may bark, and we also may mess up. So laugh along with us, and we'll keep things going. All right, that's it for housekeeping. We're going to get started with our first question for our thought leaders. And Wilfried, I thought I'd ask you this first. The official theme of bauma was digitalization and sustainability. Did you feel that theme during the event and on the show floor?
I think it was very well done in the sense that that was reflected both inside and outside of the premises of the halls. The focus on digitalization was a lot on less, in my opinion, revolution, but more evolution. Thinking about how can we use data, how can we use digital tools to drive job site performance, make sure that we're actually improving the overall efficiency, safety of construction sites. And then on the sustainability side, there was quite some effort and quite some focus on electrification. Hydrogen was a little less, but I don't think that's a big surprise. And I did feel that electrification is coming, and it's probably also important that we continue to drive it and continue to drive it more than just as a hobby, because otherwise what will happen is the Chinese will de facto continue to push and then have a leg up on Western players.
Excellent. Thank you. Becky, do you want to share some thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you, Lori. I would agree that certainly sustainability was very prominent in the areas that I visited. I spent a lot of time visiting the systems and components halls at bauma. Electrification was very prominently on display among both the power system suppliers and the component suppliers, looking at ways that they could move the needle forward in terms of promoting more sustainable solutions and offering greater opportunities for their customers, which would in this case be the OEMs. We saw in terms of digitalization, it was part of the discussion, but I'd say it was part of the larger conversation in conjunction with the solutions, the actual hardware that was being supplied. For example, the addition of sensors and other technologies, whether it be camera systems, LiDAR, things such as that to be able to help monitor operation of the machines, but also to detect and capture information, provide visioning around the machines, such as obstacle detection, and then utilizing artificial intelligence to be able to collate all that information and turn it into meaningful insights to deliver to both the OEM back in the office, as well as to the customer and to the end user on board the machine. So yes, I would say that it's definitely something that both sustainability and digitalization were very prominently displayed.
Excellent. And Simon, did you see a lot of equipment around digitalization and sustainability as well?
Yeah, like Becky was saying there, I think I went across quite a number of the halls, did quite a few steps during the course of that week. But
Just a
yeah, I think
few?
in terms of sort of halls A, B, and C, and I did see some of the seminars as well, which were given. And again, I'd certainly agree there was a lot of sort of commonality with that message of digitalization and sustainability. I think what I also saw as well was quite a lot of system level integration and system solutions which were provided. And certainly talking to a number of companies who are providing that sort of capability, it's certainly not a capability which we're displaying in bauma 2022. It's something which they've developed and now have on display or had on display in 2025. So I think that for me gives an indication of the trend and the direction of travel, whereby individual suppliers or companies are looking to provide a sort of solution, a system solution level approach to electrification in that instance.
Excellent. So, Becky, I'm going to ask this one of you first. What were 2 or 3 broad trends that you noticed during bauma 2025, and what excites you or is interesting about those trends?
Well, from the power progress perspective, because we look at all different aspects of how equipment moves, I'd like to start with the fact that we saw so many diesel engines on display still. It was very prominent in a lot of the booths of major engine suppliers, and there were even some significant product launches. HOTS introduced an entirely new family of diesel engines at the show. So I think one of the things that we can definitely say is that diesel is not dead. It's still a part of the solutions that are being offered. Certainly there was discussion of alternative fuels as part of that, but we are not out of the diesel. Diesel is still there, but internal combustion engines in general are still part of the solutions that are being offered to end users as well as the OEMs. So I think that was exciting to me in the fact that there's broader recognition that diesel will continue to be a part of the conversation for the foreseeable future. I think the other thing that, as Simon mentioned, we saw a lot more of the suppliers talking about system integration, offering packaged solutions to the customers to help them to help take some of the risk out of moving towards electrification. Um, the validation of different combinations of components is being taken out of the OEM's hands and being handled by the suppliers. It enables them to move forward in a faster, more seamless way by integrating components. Certainly, Turntide with the turnkey solutions, we saw that as one of those offerings where you're working with companies like Bonfiglioli to develop these solutions on behalf of the OEMs. But I think that we're seeing also the conversation centering around other types of systems, such as hybridization. That for a time that seemed to be a dirty word. Now we're seeing more and more hybrid solutions coming into play. That conversation is starting to happen. So I think that's something that we certainly saw. And I think the other thing too is that we're seeing more power system suppliers and equipment OEMs moving into providing on-site power solutions to help facilitate electrification. Battery energy storage systems are being offered by companies that you may have never expected to see getting into that space, such as Caterpillar, Cummins, Volvo Construction Equipment, Volvo Penta, John Deere. They're all moving towards finding ways to help their end customers be able to power the equipment that they're delivering on site. So I think those are some of the things that I think were especially prominent from my perspective.
Excellent. Simon, what did you see that were trends in
Yeah,
2025.
similar to what Becky's just said there. What one thing I made a note of at the time, and I'll just maybe recite in this conversation here, is that this hybridization of the systems. And what I mean by that is in this configuration, or the configurations which I saw, was series hybrid systems. In other words, they have the engine, the OEMs or the companies have the engine, and they're basically marrying that with a motor, electric motor, and then they're basically storing that energy which is generated, because the motor becomes a generator fundamentally. With our axial flux motors, they mirror their operation motor as they do in generation mode. And what a lot of the applications which I saw on the stand is, as Becky said, they're literally on the systems on the stand were hybrid systems, series hybrid systems, whereby they were generating the energy, storing the energy locally, and the reason for that is really reduced fuel consumption, extended sort of operational capability of the assets which they're powering. So they were. I saw at least 6 or 7 companies with systems like that, and obviously we're dealing with a number of companies who are providing those systems as well. But I saw 6 or 7 new companies that I hadn't been aware of who were in. Have designed and are selling those systems into the marketplace. So that was a really key trend for me, was that adoption of the series hybrid platforms
Excellent.
in power generation.
And Wilfried, what about you?
A couple of additional points. One is there were a few neat battery swapping solutions, integrated approaches to battery swapping. That is interesting in the sense that it allows us to extend the life cycle of those batteries, and obviously provides more opportunities as far as the upside of the equipment is concerned. And then there were some improvements, innovations around the electrification of very large equipment, meaning mining trucks. So there's quite a bit of movement in that direction. There's a lot of push by some of the leading companies to find solutions that work and that are TCO positive in the midterm, meaning 28, 29, in that range. So that's, I think, another area that's exciting to watch from a sustainability perspective as we push the feasibility of electrified powertrains. Other than that, I mean, to Becky's point, clearly diesel, potentially with alternative fuels, is with us. And I think the realization for many people has been that we need to, on the one hand, drive innovation, on the other hand, also see what is really feasible from a total cost of ownership and just operational complexity perspective to get to decarbonized solutions in construction.
Right. And just to add, so some of the diesel engines I think a lot of the diesel engines, in addition to still being around, they're able to be smaller because they are able to fit into hybrid operations. Is that true as well?
Definitely. I mean, there's a shift in terms of the kind of powertrains that we need to do the job. I think there's generally also a recognition that for some applications, it is much better to work with either hybrid or electrified solutions. I mean, electric wheel loaders in China, for example, today are more than 50% electrified, right? There were quite a few hybrid solutions for excavators, for example. So there is a business case. And I think the one thing that we really need to do is continue to push the envelope, despite the fact that the regulatory environment is not really quite as conducive as it is, for example, for on-road applications or passenger vehicle applications. Because the biggest worry that I have, and that some of the partners have that I talked to at bauma, is that if we cede the innovation to the Chinese players in this area, they will have the technology, they'll have the innovation, they'll have the scale, and at some point will just be in a much, much better competitive position than us, which is something that needs to be watched and needs to be countered.
Excellent. We'll go to the next question. And Simon, I'll start with you on this one. What technology or equipment impressed you the most during bauma?
I guess when we come back to what I just mentioned there, for me, I saw a lot. I say 6 or 7 companies who had, large companies who were working with this hybridization approach to extend the life of the operational asset of equipment, and also to have the ability to reduce fuel consumption in those equipments. Um, so that was certainly a technology which I'd seen, and obviously Turntide operates in that space. We've got a number of clients who basically utilize our axial flux motors to provide that generation power of ICE engines effectively, and from a number of different applications. But I think the equipment side, I guess, is similar to maybe what I said before. The equipment, this sort of consolidated system level approach, I saw that pretty regularly across the stands that I visited, across all the halls that I went to, in and predominantly in the sort of halls A and B. But yeah, certainly that sort of system approach. I did see also as well quite a few companies who were working with, I guess similar to what Wilfried just said there, this sort of swap out battery capability. So almost the battery becomes a product which is then applied to the application, um, and it in itself is a fully contained system in itself, but can be married with a robot, can be married with a compaction tool. It can be married with a whole variety of different tools, as it were, to do a particular job, but it's fundamentally a battery pack which is interchangeable into those assets, and that has a separate charger. So it's almost like a DeWalt tool type style, whereby you've got multiple tools in a single pack, and provided the pack's charged, you just interchange it. Has the same fittings, has the same mounting, and a number of those applications on the battery side that I saw as well were basically depopulated packs. So the form factor of the pack remains the same to get that continuity of integration, but then basically the depopulation and the population of the pack determines the kilowatt hour capacity of the pack. So the form factor remains the same. It's the count of cells in the pack which determines the capacity, which I thought was quite an innovative approach in terms of solving the problem. How you get that interoperability with different tools and equipments.
Right. Excellent. So Wilfried, what about you?
I think 2 points. One was obviously the big electrified mining truck, the 240-ton truck, because it's big, it's electric, and it's probably not the first thing that you think of when you talk about electric applications. I think the boundaries that we're pushing over there in terms of large 2 megawatt plus batteries, 6 megawatt chargers are impressive. And then also combining this with dynamic charging, that's very exciting. I mean, the truck itself was launched at MineXpo. It was nice to see it at bauma as well. And then the second thing is lesser technology or in equipment. It's more what is happening as far as business models are concerned. So you saw some of the construction equipment dealers going beyond what you would traditionally associate with a dealer, which is sort of selling of equipment and servicing of equipment, but now thinking about, okay, listen, how can I help my construction customers in terms of inbound, outbound logistics planning, for example? So the material flow within the construction site is handled by them, the recycling and the documentation is handled by them, and then taking that even a step further to go and say, listen, I can do the temporary construction for you. So the fencing, the access control, those kind of the housing can be done by us. And last but not least, taking that even into I can build a school and administrative building for you, right? So that's, I think, an interesting approach where players, both on the OEM and the dealer side, are starting to think about, okay, listen, what can I do to be a real partner to my construction customer? What are the pain points that these construction companies have, and how can I help them sort of solve this, shoulder part of the burden, and then obviously capture a bigger share of the overall value pool? So that was interesting as well.
Excellent. And Becky, same question to you.
Sure. I think the thing that excited me the most is how we're seeing companies that are taking that package of solutions and developing drop-in plug-and-play technology that sits in place of the existing engine. fitting directly into that same footprint that you have, and allows companies to essentially just pull out the engine, drop in electrification, and move forward. These are solutions that are, in some cases, years off, but we're edging ever closer to offering those opportunities. I'll go back to HOTS. They had their demonstrator model of what the concept cube that they introduced at bauma as just a model format in 2022. This year, they actually had a demonstrator model that was actively working at bauma, and that's packages an entire solution for a vibrary compaction plate compactor. So that's something that was very exciting. Perkins had a battery electric power unit that contained all elements of an electrification system, whether it be the inverter, the electric motor, the power distribution system. It packages all that together into a box that essentially they took out the engine from a McElroy pipe fusing machine and slotted this in there. You plug it in the existing connections and it operates like a diesel engine. This is technology that even 2.5, 3 years ago was not even possible. Now we're seeing it in demonstration in machines. And I think that's very exciting because not only does that, again, take risk away from the OEMs to be able to move forward with electrification, it also reduces the cost and complexity of moving forward with electrification. So I think that is something that has the potential to really drive that needle forward in a powerful way. And so I think that's very exciting to me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we are going to move to question 4. So, and for this one, I think every year there's one or two, or every 3 years for bauma, there are one or two things that are just cool, forward, future-looking items. You don't have to select one of those as the thing that most surprised you, but Wilfried, what did you see, or did you see anything on the show floor that really surprised you?
No, I mentioned it already. I think this was the Zeppelin sort of tent that showcased how they're extending their applications and their service offerings along the value chain. I think that
Yes.
was quite impressive because it has the potential to change the way we interact with construction companies.
Okay, great. Thanks. And so, Becky, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I would agree with Wilfried that, it wasn't, I think I've already mentioned some of the things that surprised me the most on the show floor. I think the thing that possibly surprised me in terms of what was absent, and it wasn't entirely absent, but certainly wasn't as much of a focus as in past events, is hydrogen
Oh,
technology. I think that we didn't see that being as prominent in terms of both the products that were being presented at the show, but even in the displays, it was kind of, we have hydrogen capability, but this isn't front and center in the same way that I saw it. I've seen it at past events. I think that there's a recognition there that hydrogen is a future fuel. It has the potential to really revolutionize the industry, but it's going to take longer to get there compared to electrification and even just more efficient internal combustion engine technology. So I think that's something that, even though it's still prominent, it's still out there. I was surprised that it wasn't more of a central focus at the show.
especially a show in Europe, I would have expected
Right.
it to be a little more. Yeah, so very interesting. So, Simon, what about you? Anything surprise you?
The scale, as we talked about before, just the scale of the event, the attendance that came to it. I think the numbers were suggesting 600,000 before the event. My sense is probably more than that, but again, I haven't seen the official figures. But no, I think in terms of what surprised me was probably that enthusiasm for a lot of the technology that's out there. I think everybody is looking to address that challenge, and as Wilfried said, it's that sort of total cost of ownership. It's going to be in my opinion, it's going to be a blended approach. There's no one size fits all. There's different technologies for different applications. Every application is different in terms of its sort of energy needs and its power needs. So therefore, I think that sort of blended approach, whether it may well be hydrogen or some sort of, again, JCB have the direct hydrogen injection engine. They had their engines there. Um, but I think, yeah, that sort of more holistic approach of how do we solve the problem is probably something that is I think much more resonant in people's minds and in the thought process and the activities that people are doing currently that I've seen. And certainly I think as Becky was saying, there's a number of companies who were demonstrating that capability. So it wasn't sort of vaporware, as I call it, it was actual physical products that have been developed that they were demonstrating that were fulfilling a particular function or functions, multiple functions, but were actually pushing that envelope of technology. And certainly hats with the product, the compactor, the cube product, which again I saw that back in 2022. That's a lot of work that those guys. I know the guys personally, but on the technical side, and they put a lot of energy and work and brain power into creating that solution. And I think that's testament to some of the resource that we've got in the industry. Is engineers like a challenge, and there's plenty of challenges out there. So it's about actually finding the optimal solution. The same one which from a business case actually presents an appropriate TCO, total cost of ownership, because it has to be commercially viable. That's the challenge. It's that squaring that circle, as it were.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I'd
And
like to. Can I just add that I think that
absolutely.
one of the things that I think was also kind of exciting to see is how many suppliers are now looking at more of a partnership approach to
Right.
research and development. They are working directly with the OEMs to and sometimes even being in their facilities, working with their research and development teams to help them to find the solutions, to develop solutions and make sure that they're meeting the needs of their customers in meaningful ways. And I think that's something that we're seeing more and more companies are taking that approach to try to ensure that the customers are getting what they need and the performance is there.
And I think it's even beyond that in the sense that we've seen collaborations between various players in the same field, right? So maybe two engine players that are working together to develop a new engine simply because the pressures are many, and it just makes sense to tie up and mitigate the risk of developing new platforms. And at the same time, you need to develop these new platforms because diesel is going to be around for some time. So I found that quite exciting to see. The other thing that was, for me, a little bit surprising is when you talk to people, they seem to be actually quite positive. By and large, the mood, at least from what I could see, was rather positive. There was some optimism around the kind of announcements that the European Union had done, that some of the national governments had done. So people did think that there was an opportunity to move forward. Obviously, we'll have to see how this pans out, but it did feel a little bit like the worst is behind us in terms of the difficult couple of years that we've had. Maybe 25 is still going to be a sort of a not so positive year as far as sales are concerned, but then the thinking is that things will look up and go back to more positive and profitable times.
I think two things are interesting in what everyone has been saying. The first is, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, adopting technology and being excited about it was there was still some hesitancy. So it's really exciting to hear you say that there was some positive buzz around technology. So that's exciting for me to hear. And then the other thing is with the partnership, Simon can speak more to this, but our partnership with Turntide, Turnkey Solutions, but also our work with OEMs. We definitely, our engineering team works hand in hand with engineering teams of OEMs, and that's something that I think is becoming more prevalent with other companies. And of course, we're doing the same thing. Would you say that's true, Simon?
Yeah, I was going to say I'd written down just in my notes just from before we start the call about collaborations and partnerships. That's going to be key. It is key. It will be key, and it will remain to be key, because as I said, there's a lot of challenges in front of us. There's a lot of problems which we need to solve, and you're not going to solve those individually, in my view.
Right.
And I think that's sort of testament to what Turntide's approach is, and the strategy from ourselves is that Turntide turnkey approach is the sort of cornerstone of what I've just said there. But you're totally right, Laurie, that for us working with the clients we're working with, it's about getting into the detail, getting into that relationship in a very deep and meaningful way, because as I said, every application is different. I've never seen in 30 years the same application in terms of the
Right.
specifications. So that in itself gives an indication of that level of engagement which you need to have with the customers. And we need to understand not only the technical challenges but other commercial ones as well, because uh, the commercial solutions and a good technical solutions will be the ones that will succeed. There is always a balance, in my opinion, that making sure the technical solution is meeting the requirements for that customer, but meeting the requirements for that marketplace, and it needs to be cognizant of that TCO. And I think that's possibly reason why we're seeing some of the challenges with regards to hydrogen is really just that total cost of ownership. It's not as ubiquitous, I would say, as you would say in the battery technology space. The position that battery technology is now across a whole variety of different markets is quite prominent. And I think as a consequence of that, then that for me is sort of setting the reference point for, in terms of stored energy, is setting the reference point of how that stored energy could be used, whether it, as Becky said, in new applications of energy storage on construction sites from players that we hadn't seen providing that capability, or whether it's actually, as I was mentioning, battery systems on a um, on a powertrain, which is using the engine as the generator, and the battery is actually just storing that energy to be used at a point in time when it's required. So I think it is a blended approach in my view, and therefore collaboration and partnerships is definitively the way forward. And I think that's what's going to drive the success of companies, I think, is that closer working relationship. And as Wilfried said, sometimes you're aligned in the same marketplace. You may well be competitors in one context, but actually partners in the next. But that's the
Right.
diversity of the applications and the challenges we've got, is that you need to have that mindset that you're not going to be able to do on your own. Big as you think you might be as a company, the reality is you're not going to have answers to all the questions which are there, and you need that input and those fresh pair of eyes on a problem in order to drive out that innovation.
And I think
Excellent.
to your sorry, just one more point. I mean,
Oh, please.
that's
Yes.
something that I think is extremely dear to my heart. I really believe that your point about it's not necessarily the biggest and the best who will survive. It's probably the company that is, able to partner in an
Mhm.
effective way and come up with alliances, depending on the business environment that we're seeing. Just because the threat from competition coming out of China is massive. The volatility and uncertainty that we have in our environment is massive, and the speed of development and change is massive, right? So that's clearly something where partnerships will be absolutely key, and it's a capability that you need to develop. It's not something that you just have. Most of us come from a background, or many of the companies come from a background where they actually were in charge of their own destiny and could do many things by themselves. That's just not the case anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. Before I move on, is there any other commentary on this question that you want to share before we move to the next one? Awesome. I'm going to move to the next one, but I'm sure we'll have some other questions along these lines. So I don't necessarily want this to be a political question. I just was very curious if there were conversations and buzz around the U.S. tariffs, and if so, kind of what was the sentiment? Did you hear anything particular? And Becky, you're the first person I'm going to ask, and feel free, to just tell me what you think or pass on the question if you don't really feel like answering it.
It's fine. I can answer that. Obviously, the tariff came up during conversations. It wasn't something that we necessarily brought up. It just kind of naturally came up because it is a concern among suppliers, but for the most part, they all had the same response when it came up in conversation, and that's, we'll just wait and see what's going to happen, because it is such a fluid situation right now. I think they recognize that it is kind of political maneuvering at this stage, and things could change tomorrow. And in fact, they did. There was some repealing of some of the tariffs towards China, even during bauma. So I think that there is the recognition that this is something that we just need to see how it plays out. So that's the gist of the conversations I had.
Excellent. Simon, what about you?
I didn't actually get any. I didn't get any commentary to the tariffs actually in the conversations which I had. I think I can understand. I had obviously had conversations outside of bauma, and I think how I could phrase those conversations is, well, it is what it is. We'll work
Right.
with what we've got. It's not stopping. It won't stop us in terms of creating those innovative solutions, because that's a constant, as it were. There's a constant theme there, and there's a continuum. And so, yeah, at bauma, it didn't come up at all with me. I had about 100, and I was just checking, I had 114 meetings, conversations over
Wow.
that week, and it didn't come up once. It has come
Okay.
up in other conversations outside of bauma, but I say the feedback I've had there is, it is what it is. That's not going to stop us. We continue, we carry on, because the solution which it's providing in the context of some of those companies I'm referring to is much greater. The benefit is much greater than the tariff. So therefore, the tariff becomes a less important aspect. But I do agree that from what I'm seeing on the sidelines, it does seem to be quite fluid. It does have a tendency to change hour to hour, day to day, week to week. So I think that's clearly unsettling for companies, of course, because there's not that continuity of understanding. But I think, as you said, Becky, I think there's a bit of politics going on here, and political maneuvering that's going on. But in the context of that, I didn't get any. There was no conversation that I had about tariffs last week in Bama the other week.
Thanks so much. So, Wilfried, what about you?
Yeah, for me, it was a little different in the sense that this did come up. And I think that there are two factors over here. One is that it's hard to plan and make plans and investment plans in such an uncertain environment, which clearly leads to reduced expenses and investments and hirings, and potentially even a reduction of force in the sense that you have to adjust to a new economic reality that is driven and at least will have some impacts in 25, maybe going into 26. And it also has an impact, obviously, depending on how things work out in the end, on company strategies and supply chain strategies and all that. So that was definitely something where the combination of I need to change my business model and probably will see a downturn in the short to midterm, that was something that was weighing on people's mind. Right? It wasn't, I mean, the attitude was we'll wait and see, because you cannot plan if you don't have a clear direction.
Right.
But it was definitely on the mind of players that have quite intricate supply chains and also production concepts where you produce one machine in one plant. Right, so I may produce a large excavator in Japan and then ship it to the rest of the world. Clearly, that has implications.
Yes.
And now I apologize, I have to drop off, but Giovanni was with me. He's also a partner in our Chicago office, so he'll take over.
Thank you so much, Wilfried and Gio. Thanks for hopping in and joining us for the
No
Q&A,
problem.
which we are about to. Wilfried, I hope you have a great day, and thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Wilfried.
So we're going to go to the Q&A. I am going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see the questions that have been coming in. It's a little hiccup on the back end of our webinar program, so I apologize for that. But if you have any topic ideas, please send them to me at lori.detoro@turntide.com. And we are going to end the slideshow, and I am going to stop sharing. And let's see. So So one question I'm seeing is, um, as far as like the regenerative power, is some of that being used for hydraulics? Is some of it being for other systems? Is it always traction? What are some of the ways that the hybrid systems are using electric versus diesel? And whoever would like to take that question first can jump in.
Yeah, I can maybe give some commentary to that. So as I was saying before, what I was seeing on the application side and on the systems that I was demonstrated to me and what I was discussing with some of these companies was they were reducing the fuel consumption of the assets. So when these things are sitting idle, let's say they're running about 1800 or 2000 RPM, then obviously you can generate from that and store that energy which is being generated. And as that asset has a requirement to deploy that power, then you can supply that power, that energy from the pack, as opposed to increasing, the consumption of the diesel engine, running it from an idle state to a higher state. So it, again, depends on the size of the pack which you've got on the asset, of course, whether it's a 40 kilowatt or 100 kilowatt hour battery pack. Obviously, you've got a longer duration of time available to discharge that power potentially. But yeah, that was certainly one or use case, as it were, of how that was used. I think also in terms of reducing the sort of emissions element as well, of course, because you're running at a lower level than a higher level of diesel engine, then obviously in certain environments there's a lower level of emission which is created. I think as well in terms of some of the applications that I see, it's almost like a silent capability. So you can basically go into um, just a full power operation using the pack as opposed to using the engine. So basically, there's no noise. So from an environmental point of view, there's no external noise which is created. It's not a diesel engine running because the diesel engine's off. You're using the power from the pack in order to provide that particular utilization of the system. So it's a combination of all those. I would say all of those above in terms of how it's being deployed and how it's being used. And again, in some of these applications, there's regulatory requirements in Europe and certain cities. Maybe for example in Amsterdam or Rotterdam or some of the sort of central cities in Europe, that contracts are only being awarded on the basis that the systems are electrified. So you need to have an electrified system in order to compete for the contract, and you don't win the contract unless you've got electric assets within the portfolio of how you're going to deliver that. If it's digging holes in the road or taking up parts of the road, if the equipment which you have is not capable of being operated in electric mode, then in the city centre, then you're not going to be securing those contracts. So the legislation at a local European level is certainly driving some of that initiative for electrification.
Okay, Becky, did you have anything to add about that?
Um, I didn't necessarily have a lot of conversation about that at bauma, but regenerative power is certainly becoming more prevalent in a variety of industries. We're seeing it in the mining sector where you have production systems that, for example, I did a story on a train, a locomotive that had a regenerative power system where when they were traveling downhill, it stored up the energy, and then that meant that the diesel engines did not have to be used as often. It helped to reduce the emissions. It helped to reduce fuel costs. So you're seeing applications like that, but you're also seeing it, as Simon mentioned, in areas such as ports, where you have a diesel engine that's providing the high-speed power when you're outside of the port area. But then as you're moving into the port system, the marine application, you're seeing the electrified system, the power generators being used to bring that vessel into the ports and reduce the emissions levels there. So it is definitely something where that regenerative power can be used for, whether it's for the traction motors, but it can also be something that powers other systems within the machine. So it's becoming more commonplace.
Excellent. And Gio, did you have
Maybe
anything?
sorry, I was going to just expand that. Apologies, Joe. I was just going to expand that and say what I also see is a lot of companies don't want to. I'm talking about sort of excavators, wheeled excavators, tracked excavators, etc. They don't want to basically touch the electrics on the hydraulics. So sort of what I mean by that. So they won't basically go to electrical actuators. There is quite a significant cost in using electrical actuation. And certainly when you're doing a retrofit of these sort of vehicles, taking the ICE engine out and electrifying the asset, there is issues in terms of warranty. With that being new equipment, there's issues in terms of warranty, and then in terms of the certifications which that vehicle has. If you then went down the route of actually electrifying the hydraulic with electrical actuators, now that what I mean by that is, well, that doesn't stop you basically using electrical pumps instead of a mechanical pump on the hydraulic, and I see a lot of that, but actually going through into full electrification of the actuation of the function of the hydraulic is typically a step people don't want to take. And the reason for that, I understand from conversations I have, is about the certifications and the validations of warranties on those vehicles. Sorry,
Excellent.
Gio.
Gio, what do
No,
you
no,
have to say
absolutely.
about that?
No, I think Simon and Becky answered very clearly. I agree also. I definitely saw, especially with the mining, in the mining aspect, I think, the train that Becky was talking about, probably the Fortescue example, right? They also had the battery electric machine, done with Liebherr. And I think in those applications it becomes more and more important, the regeneration aspects of it. And then definitely, in other machine as well, is something that is definitely top of mind. And so not much to add. One thing that I wanted to add, since we're talking, applications, that's something that I don't know if you talked about before. Something that surprised me was the focus on simplicity of integration that I saw at bauma. I think, we always see this focus on performance and, what the machines can do and how. Something that, was really clear to me is that now, especially supplier, tend to put a lot of attention on, seamless integration when they move from hydraulic to electric or mechanical to electric. I think Poclain is a good example of in their e-wheel solution where they really focus on maintaining the same mechanical interfaces. I think Perkins as an example there when they show the battery electric power unit that was supposed to substitute an engine, and really the selling focus was sure the performance, but how easy it is to put it in. And that was something that was, surprising to me compared to the past. I think suppliers are really understanding that this is complicated in the energy transition. They try to simplify the life of their customers as much as possible in the energy transition. Just not the question you had, but was kind of
That's great.
adjacent to the application technology.
Yeah, do you have anything else to add about any of the other questions we asked toward the beginning of the webinar? Was there anything that you thought was really innovative? Were there any trends that you saw that we haven't talked about? I know we've talked about a lot.
And probably there will be some overlap because me and Wilfried were walking the floor together.
Right.
I think something that was clear to me is this focus on integrated solutions. I think, OEM and suppliers do realize that, their solution, their increasing productivity doesn't mean much if it's just on the machine. It doesn't really impact the full site operations, right? If you leave earlier for the train and then you need to wait 20 minutes, then it's not really helpful that you left early. And so I think we see a lot of suppliers and OEM focusing on expanding that solution and bringing in new technologies, helped by digital. I think Zeppelin had a good showcase there on really like the full spectrum of services they had. I think the let's say traditional technology suppliers like Topcon, Hexagon also obviously focus a lot on that, but also the OEM, right, with their Caterpillar with the Vision Link, CAT Command, remote control. So that was definitely a topic. So full site solution. And then I assume you talked a lot about sustainability. One thing, and maybe I'm a voice out of the choir here, but I definitely was a lot of solutions on sustainability. My feeling was they weren't as pushed as a couple of years back. So everybody had a lot of new machine and technologies. Maybe with the exception of Liebherr with some of the big track, I didn't feel that was as pushed, as visible, and maybe a couple of years ago. That was a little bit kind of surprising. but a lot of solution, but less visible. Let's put it like that.
Got you. Well, excellent. Well, that is our last question, and I want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining us. Wilfried, who isn't there, Gio, Becky, Simon, thank you for the wonderful conversation and for sharing your thoughts around bauma. We really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank
And
you,
You're
Lori.
welcome.
excellent. And attendees, thank you for joining us as well. The webinar will be available on demand in about 48 hours. We hope you'll register for the May and June webinars that are coming up. And we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks again for joining us. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks.